Today we're going to be going over how to create values or do a practice with values. So in your art kit, mine's set up just a little bit differently, but you guys should have all the same things. So I have my bag of drawing utensils. You want to get that out. And then in your paper folder, you should have, now like I said, my kit's just set up just slightly different, but in your paper folder, if you dig through it, and it should be towards the back by the color wheel, you're going to find a sheet that looks something like this. And that's what we're going to use to practice making values. So values are creating the lightness or darkness of something. And in this case, it's going to be the lightness or darkness of our different drawing tools that you have in your packet. Okay? So the first thing that I really want you to make sure that you do is to read the directions for each section. So this first one says, replicate the value scales using the appropriate mediums. So that's what you're using to do the values. Okay? So in your bag, we need a graphite pencil. Okay? And it says to use 4H at the first part of our value scale, an HB, and a 6B. Now there might be some discrepancy on the pencils that you have in your kit, but you're going to look for the 4H. So here it happens to be green, some of yours might be blue, and you can find the numbers towards the end of the pencil, kind of by the little metal cap here. And if you do not have a 4H, but you have a 2H, that would be totally fine. And if you just have the HB, then you're going to use the HB for this whole section. Okay? And so in the middle, as your values start to get darker, it wants you to use your HB pencil. So again, those numbers or letters are at the end, kind of near the caps. If you have one of the blue drawing pencils, you might not have that metal cap at the end. So try to do this the best that you can, just because there's some discrepancies maybe with the kinds of pencils you have. So if it's a 2H, that's fine. But ideally, we're going to be using 3. And that numbering system is what helps create darker values, because the B's are going to be a softer, darker lead. And then it says to use your 6B. So if you can, at least have an H. If it's a 2H, that's okay. Hopefully you have an HB, which is the middle of the road kind of lead. And then the 6B is a very soft lead, and it's going to be much darker. So it's really important that you read the instructions. So it says graphite. Use drawing pencils to match values, because that changes throughout the worksheet. Okay? The other thing is, if you notice, there is a chart here that kind of helps guide you. So if we're moving our value from light to dark, the very lightest square is going to be blank. There's nothing going to be in this first one because that's the lightest. Then you're going to use that 4H and you're going to start to add value. Then you're still using the 4H, but you got to make it a little bit darker. And then you're still using that 4H and it's a little bit darker yet. So white, putting in your value, making it darker, making it darker. But if you notice, it's a slow transition at first. Okay, we don't just jump from white or nothing all the way to the blackened or darkest one. So then your HBs are going to take over in the middle. And so you're going to try to make this value match this one, and match this one, and match. And then you're going to switch to your 6B, and that's going to help you get to the darkest values that you can create. So that's that first one. And it's really important that you can see the subtle changes as you create the darker values. The other thing is that we want to make sure we fill the whole box. Okay, so don't just scribble in part of it. You need to fill the whole box. And I really want you to do this as neatly as you can. So when I'm grading this assignment, I'm going to be looking at your value changes. Did you use the right materials to do it? And then how neatly did you create that? So even though this is a practice, I still want you to take your time. So the next one says that we are going to be using cross-hatching. So hopefully you're familiar with that, but you might not be. And simply cross-hatching is creating lines and crossing over them with other lines, and then the closer and the more lines that you use, you're going to get that value change. So again, we're starting with nothing, pure white, that's our lightest value, and we're going all the way to the darkest value we can make. But this time, we are using your ballpoint pen. Now, there might be a little bit of discrepancy on this, but I'm pretty sure that everybody has a ballpoint pen. It may look like this particular pen, or it might be, I don't know, have a clear cap to it. But basically, you're looking for a pen that's kind of traditionally just a ballpoint pen. So it's not going to be one of your felt tips, or it's not going to be the Uniball. Okay, that's a little bit different. So you're going to use this one to create these. Now, you're trying to match the box below, so that's a good guide for you. And you can see that those value changes are subtle as you go down. So you want to make sure that you take your time, and you also want to make sure you fill the box. So just don't do the middle of the boxes. And then we want to make sure that we're not going outside of the boxes either. So that's another thing I'm looking for. Again, using the right tool to make the value, using the right value technique, showing me your lightest to darkest, and then I want to be able to see those subtle differences as that value changes. Okay, so the one down here is called stippling. And many of you, again, you might be familiar with that. But this one is going to ask you to use your Sharpie marker. So all of you are going to have a Sharpie. And it's not the smallest point, but you can still see it does have a pretty fine point to it. And stippling is simply creating dots. And then the more dots you add, is going to change your value. So this first one, it looks like there's nothing there, but there are some very subtle stippling marks. And so you want to make sure that you try to replicate that. And then the next one's going to have a few more. And the next one's going to have a few more. And the next one's going to have a few more. So I should see light to dark. And it makes a difference. If you don't use the marker, stippling can be very unfun to do. A marker is a lot easier to help you show that stippling because, again, you're just making small dots. So at first it's like no big deal. But then as you get to those darker values, if you had to use a pen, it would take a very, very long time. So that's why we're using the marker for this one. Okay, so, and this one's not also all white. There is some value in there, so I want to see that value as it changes. Okay. Then the last one is called scumbling. You could also think of scumbling simply as scribbling because basically that's what you're going to do. You're going to make these like, I don't know, scribble lines. And this one again is not all white. So you want to make sure that you get some value and then you make it darker and then you make it darker and you make it darker. So I'm going to be looking for that change. It can't all be the same value. And so that's why we are practicing this because we're going to use this when we do a project after we finish going through all of the elements of art. So remember, value is going from light to dark, or you could work backwards and go from dark to light. I think it's a little bit easier personally if you start light and get darker and darker and darker, but some of you might want to work the other way. Again, make sure that you are checking that you're using the right tool. So pencils at the top, ballpoint pen in the middle, marker for stippling, and then for the scumbling, it's back to that ballpoint pen again. So you're really just using your pencils, your pen, and your marker. And so that's going to leave a few other items in your pencil bag. There's no reason probably that you need to erase unless you got too dark too fast. And then make sure that in your pencil bag you have a pencil sharpener. Do not sharpen your pencil into the baggie. Put it over a trash can so that you can toss those into the garbage. Don't sharpen it into this baggie. I had students last quarter do that. And so some of you are going to have pencil shavings in with your pencils. So your goal today is to take your time, show me really good value changes from light to dark, make sure you're using the right tool, and then once you've finished everything, you're going to take a good picture of it. And then that picture you're going to submit to Schoology, and that's how you're going to turn this in, especially since I'm not going to see you guys in the classroom. So if you have questions or concerns, feel free to reach out to me. Otherwise, I think it's pretty straightforward as long as you don't forget to check and make sure you know which one is doing what. Okay? So happy value making.